We constantly react to our environment and to the people around us and leave the relationship in that reaction mode. We don't think about what goes to make up that situation. We always and consistently blame externals. If someone is angry at us, or if someone has done us some harm, if we think that someone has done us some harm, or if someone treats us in a certain way, we always assume that it's the fault of the other person, and we always defend our place, and we always try to imagine that we're perfectly right in this instance. And even if we do allow that we might be just a little bit at fault, still, primarily, we feel victimized and think that this thing has happened to us from out there. And the Buddha teaches us something very different from that. The Buddha teaches us that every event that we see is the display of some previous cause. That is to say, that what we are seeing now at this point is effect. Granted, effect, and you should know this, will go on to create further cause. That is to say, even as an adult, if someone were to come up and punch you in the nose, that is to be understood as the effect of some previous cause or causes. But your reaction, your response to that event, both internally and externally, whether you punch back and whether you hate or whether you react in some violently emotional way, these things will go on to create further causes that will ripen in some future time, and the chain is endless. It continues to create itself. It's like a snowball going downhill. It continues to get bigger and continues to go downhill because it is its nature to do so. The continuum continues so long as we fixate on phenomena as being external and separate from ourselves, and fixate as well on self-nature as being inherently real. And the Buddha gives us an actual technology by which we can begin to unravel this mess and begin to solve the problem. And that technology seems very simple at times, and yet really it's the very hardest thing to do. In that we have to understand that all sentient beings experience suffering. Everyone, perhaps not at every single moment, but everyone experiences suffering. That they all have in common their effort to be happy. They all wish to be happy. That they do not know how to create happiness. That they too are continuing in a continuum of cause and effect relationships, just as we are. And from that, we must understand that the cycle has to be broken in some way. The bottom line, according to the Buddha, is that our belief in self-nature as being inherently real and solid, that concept that we have about the nature of self, is so rigid and so strong that we remain fixated on that, and remain fixated as well on the process of externalizing all phenomena to the degree that our minds become divided, deluded in that division, that we constantly reaffirm and fixate on objective and subjective reality. And focusing in that way, we continue to create the format by which all future cause and effect relationships will take place. The way to stop that, then, is to antidote the entire process by pacifying the fixation process, by pacifying the tendency to fixate on self-nature and on phenomena. And by realizing, therefore, or rather I should say awakening to our true nature, which is the uncontrived, primordial, luminous wisdom nature. All of this sounds pretty highfalutin. And it sounds like it's all very theoretical. And it sounds as though one would have to have very high teaching and do very high things in order to accomplish this spiritual goal. And to some degree there's some truth in that. But the plain fact of the matter is that we actually have to start on a very simple, practical, here and now level. That young boy that I spoke to just a moment ago used a very good example. We could block punches instead of throwing them. I know that sounds like a childish thing. It sounds like a very simple solution, but it's a beginning. In a very practical way, we have to embrace the idea of loving kindness. We have to embrace the idea of not externalizing all of our situations and problems to the degree that we continue in a cycle of blame. That we cannot create an inner scenario by which it seems to be okay to think about circumstances as being somehow so separate from us that there is no relationship between us and what we do, or us and what we feel, us and what we engage in. That process of distinction, that process of creating such duality within the mind becomes so deeply ingrained that actually begins to happen. And we become then less competent in our lives than the little children that I just spoke to. They are able to understand, at least are beginning to understand, that they have a relationship that they are uniquely responsible for with all sentient beings. We constantly try to evade that issue. They are able to see that there is some connection between the content of their minds, carried over from the past and also in the present moment, and what they experience. We do not wish to accept that responsibility. We prefer to stay in a mode where we constantly react and constantly continue in something like an unconscious way, and therefore become impotent. We cannot change. We cannot see ourselves. We cannot understand. We cannot make a difference. We cannot stop the process. We cannot know how cause and effect relationships actually occur. And we do not understand the very fiber of our lives. In that way, we are more children than the children. Continuing on that vein, and actually it may seem as though this is something of a different subject, but if you listen, perhaps you'll understand that we're still talking about responsibility, that we are still talking about knowing oneself, knowing the content of one's mind. Let's think about when we must do, or when we have done, what these children are doing at this very moment. At this very moment, these children are just beginning to embark on the Dharma path. They are just beginning to embrace the Buddhist teachings. They are just beginning to understand some of the fundamental ideas and philosophies. For some of us, there was a time when we actually began on that path, and embraced some of those ideas and evaluated them. For some others, we are doing that at this very moment. For some others, we are not really wishing to embrace the Buddha's path, but are just wishing to continue in a spiritual way and to understand what the next step might be. At any rate, these are all different stages of spiritual development and different stages of the path, and they're all very valuable and very precious. But one thing that we all always go through, and that we go through universally, is some kind of decision making through which we understand what we must do spiritually. And we make a decision really as to how to follow a path, as to whether to follow a traditional path such as the Buddha's teaching, or as to whether to really wing it and try to live a spiritual life with no formal teaching or training or path, or whether we wish to follow a system that perhaps is very new in the world and seems reasonable to us. There are many different directions that we can go, particularly in this country. There are many different options that we have. Sometimes that's unfortunate, but it's true. One thing that we must all do universally is we must decide why we are embarking on this path. The why may be the single most important question that we answer during our whole career. If we are beginning, we should not be stingy or thrifty with the time that we spend on the question why. The question as to why we practice is so fundamentally important, so foundational, that every step that we take spiritually from that point on will be affected by the quality of that original decision, and especially by the insightfulness with which that decision is approached. In the Buddha's teachings, we spend a great deal of time on why. Because universally, and this is interesting, it isn't just true of Westerners, but universally, people go into Dharma or go into spiritual growth for the wrong reasons. And I think, to be perfectly honest with ourselves, we have to assume that our first reasons for becoming spiritual, if you will, were bad ones. We have to be okay with that. And that's hard for some people, because some people begin to enter onto a spiritual path because of an experience that they have had. And perhaps that experience was meeting a teacher with whom they are strongly impacted, from or about whom they feel a strong feeling. Or perhaps that decision is that they have a dream, and the dream is very moving to them. Or perhaps they have a vision. Perhaps they see that other people around them are experiencing spiritual experiences, that they are having a spiritual life, and they feel kind of left out. They feel like maybe they should get on the road, get their act together. Or maybe they have this idea that they've always been spiritual. They can kind of see it inside themselves, and so they've come to a point in their lives when they're really going to do something about it. It's hard to think about it, but all of those are really bad reasons. Bad meaning this: Well, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with them, but they're bad reasons because they will not sustain us on the path. If you feel that you have been spiritual all your life and you are merely continuing that feeling, don't you know how often your feelings change and how they vary from day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, decade to decade? How long have you lived? Have you lived long enough to see that that happens? You only have to live about a week to see that that happens. These feelings are they're puffballs. And even if there has been this thread, this continuing thread of feeling spiritual throughout your life, there are days when you do not feel spiritual at all. There are days there are months when you do not feel spiritual. There are years. This wasn't a spiritual year, you see. And entering onto the path, one can no longer really afford to have not spiritual years. You just don't have that many years to spend. You can't even really have non-spiritual weeks or non-spiritual days. You can't afford to vacillate that much. Because the path becomes one's life. Not something you can jump on and off. It's like a marriage, but it isn't like today's marriages. You can't divorce it. So you have to have a really good foundation. If you enter onto a spiritual path because you have a strong feeling with, let's say, a certain teacher, guru, that's great if that hooks you. That's what we call in the Buddhist path the hook of compassion. That's the Buddha's hook, and it's touched your heart, and hopefully it will bring you to the next step. But that's not enough, and that's not a good reason to practice. We are human, and our feelings will change moment by moment, and our perceptions of that teacher will change because we have fallible perception. We do not have pure view. If we had pure view, we would understand the nature, the essential nature of that teacher. We would not even view that teacher as a human being. We would view that teacher as a reflection of our own primordial wisdom nature, and view that teacher's face as the face of our own mind. But that's not what we're feeling when we have a strong feeling about that teacher. And so that's not enough, and it's a bad reason to practice. It will not sustain us. Our feelings will change. We will happen upon that teacher in a telephone booth or something like that, and unconsciously catch them doing something really human, like scratching their bottoms or something like that. And I don't mean to be crude, but these things happen. Teachers have human bodies. They do human things. Some of the other reasons that we practice, a vision. If you've had one vision, you're likely to have another. If one vision can sweep you off your feet, so will the next one. And at this point in the game, visions like that really are composed of many different things, including and especially the karmic material of our minds and our emotions. And we've already talked about how that constantly changes and is impermanent. If we had a dream, we'll have another dream. If a dream about religion or spirituality has affected us so deeply, it's very likely that we'll have another one that can affect us very deeply. These are not good reasons because they are not nurturing enough. They will not sustain you. The Buddha teaches us to spend a great long time, the first part of our career as a spiritual person, in a process that they call turning the mind, that we call turning the mind. This turning the mind is as important as anything that you will ever accomplish. including walking through the very door of liberation and awakening to your true nature, that which we call enlightenment. Why is it as important as enlightenment, when enlightenment is the supreme goal? Because without turning the mind, there will be no enlightenment. That's like saying, why is an apple seed as important as an apple? The connection is obvious. No seed, no apple. In the Dharma path, one must spend a tremendous amount of effort turning the mind toward Dharma. And what that actually consists of is taking the time to really look around at cyclic existence, that is, the cycle of death and rebirth, what we call in this philosophy samsara. To look around at all the lives that all sentient beings lead, from the human lives to the animal lives, and even Lord Buddha teaches us that there are non-physical entities or beings that exist. And you can learn about those through reading the Buddha's teachings, or through continuing to study with a qualified teacher who can teach you these things. But even just the ones that you can see, by examining them, we can come to understand that what the Buddha teaches us is true, that all of cyclic existence is pervaded with suffering. That even those that are happy suffer from the suffering of the temporariness of that happiness. We have all been happy, there's no doubt about it. Right now we might be fairly happy, we're pretty content, none of us are bleeding or dying at the moment. But there will come a time when we do. No one has escaped dying yet. And according to the Buddha, cyclic existence has to be looked at as a whole. To pick out one little thing and say, well, that makes me happy, is childish and will bring no good result. Because it has to be understood that that little thing will end. It has to be understood that that little thing doesn't even really have the capacity to make any of us constantly happy for any length of time, even if it did last forever. So, from that, we begin to develop a yearning or a sense of connection with the idea that there must be something else. Lord Buddha suggests that we come to understand what the components of cyclic existence actually are. That is to say, what makes up happiness and unhappiness. And you have to get kind of deep for this. You can't just be floating on the surface, just dealing with what happens to you. You have to probe more deeply. The Buddha teaches us that we should probe till we understand that every single event in our lives that we see, no matter what it might be, is brought about by some previous cause. That in relative existence, there is beyond a doubt a constant continuum of cause and effect relationships. The Buddha teaches us that every suffering that we have now is the result of some previous non-virtue, and every pleasure that we have now is the result of some previous virtue or generosity. If we leave it at that, then we can just try to do good things so that we'll be happy. And that's something. That's really important. That's a good step. It's better than just constantly reacting as though you didn't even live here, or as though you weren't part of it somehow. But if we go deeper than that, we can see that no matter what, the continuum will continue so long as we continue it. And within that kind of scenario, everything is impermanent. Everything that has a beginning must end. Everything has the potential for being the cause of some discomfort or suffering. The Buddha went on to say that there is an end to suffering, however. There is an end. And that was the news that he uniquely brought due to his own awakening. That end to suffering he calls enlightenment or awakening. Very difficult to understand what that enlightenment or awakening is, mostly because they never describe it. The reason why the Buddha never describes enlightenment or awakening is that the moment you describe it, you've lost its meaning. It really can't be described, in that if we describe it, we have to use relative terminology. We have to pinpoint it. We have to create a concept, and we have to describe our way around that concept. And the very nature of enlightenment is that it is free of such conceptualizations. It is free of contrivance. So the moment you contrive an explanation, that ain't it. You see? We've lost it. So we have some difficulty here in that students coming to the path clearly can decide that they want to escape discomfort, but clearly don't know what else they're supposed to do. And so we find a sticking point that's very difficult, and that sticking point could last, unfortunately, the entire career of our practice, the entire length of our career in practice. And that is that we realize we're supposed to be doing something, and we try not to suffer, and we try to create good causes, but we just don't get it. We don't get the big picture. And we still allow ourselves to cling to the process of fixation. That is to say, the fixation on self-nature as being inherently real, and therefore the externalization of phenomena. We allow ourselves still to remain fixated in that way. We formulate an idea as to what the end result will be, what success will be. And unfortunately, we kind of make up our own heaven. We kind of decide that it would be really great if everybody loved everybody and there was peace on earth and no more war, and everybody's like looking meaningfully into each other's eyes, and nobody ever falls out of love, and everybody's into it, and let's see, everybody has lots of prosperity, and this may sound really trite and really stupid, but these are some of the ideas that we cling to. And we enter into Dharma thinking this is what we want. That kind of temporal, describable happiness. Try to remember that everything you can describe will end. Has to. Because all concepts that begin must end. It's as though we must pierce the veil of these temporary, describable, ordinary, really, goals that we have, and realize that this really wasn't what the Buddha was talking about. The Buddha spoke of a time when one could awaken to their primordial wisdom nature, to that pure luminosity, free of all contrivance, free of all conceptualization, free of all of those things that go to make up cause and effect relationships, that go to make up suffering. That one could simply awaken in such a way that one could abide spontaneously in that state of pure luminosity, simply awake. In that state of spaciousness and pure view. There is no fixation on self-nature as being inherently real. There is no, therefore, externalization of phenomena. There is no subjective objective. One is simply awake, and in that pure state, there is no suffering. It must therefore be the goal to awaken in that way. And I have actually had people in their agony, and people do agonize, you know. You know that. Say to me, well, does that mean I don't get to want anything anymore? Or does that mean I don't get to have anything anymore? Well, I just want to be loved. The Buddha teaches us that the problem with coming together is that it always leads to separation. The problem with coming is that it always means going. The problem with wanting is that it always means there'll be a time when you don't have it. There is nothing really wrong with anything that you feel or do or say. When it becomes a problem is in that by its nature, it cannot be permanently satisfied. That's how it becomes a problem. So it's like we have to stop making up our own private little heavens and our own private little nirvanas according to what we think we want. And we have to finally come to the place where we really get the big picture, and the big picture is what the Buddha has taught us. There is a cessation of suffering. There is an end to it. And that cessation of suffering is called enlightenment, and it happens when desire ceases. Some people say that when they enter into the path and finally get the big picture, that there's no way out of this other than to stop craving. And that there's really no way to get the white picket fence thing down. That they go through a process of grieving. I have to say, for what? Grieving for what? For all the ways that you have gone already that did not satisfy you? For all the times that what you started ended already? For all the times that something began that then ended? For what? Are we grieving because we have to let go of a habit? Perhaps we would better spend our time grieving for those who continue in this continuum with no answers. Endlessly, not even knowing that there's anything else besides reaction. Not even knowing that there's a way. For those people that are endlessly trying to be happy and do nothing but to continue to create more causes and more effects. When I spend my grieving time, it is for that. How amazing it would be if we could understand ourselves the way these children are beginning to understand themselves. These young children that I just taught. Because they're starting out looking at their lives, and they get this really clear practical image, like whatever's happening to you has a cause somewhere, and if you change those causes, you can change your life. Until we turn our minds, we don't get that. And we are victims. But we don't have to be. How amazing if we could be as smart as our simple children. And we could sort of look in the mirror and remember what the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught, do you want to know what your past life was about? If you want to know what your past life was about, look at you now. Whatever you see happening now, that's what your past life was about. If you have lost love, then you abandoned others before. If you have a hard time making people take you seriously, then you were unkind in the same way before. If you're wealthy and you're getting your life together and things go pretty smoothly for you, you were helpful to others in your past. If you're physically very strong, then you were protective of the lives of others. If you are not strong physically, then perhaps you did not protect the life of others. If we have that kind of simple understanding and can just act really in an intelligent way, looking to the root of causes, and then even beyond that, to realizing that we must at some point really adopt the ultimate goal, which is enlightenment. We can really make this life a vehicle for something very precious. We have that option, and we have that choice. Even the Buddha himself, of course he wouldn't choose to, but even the Buddha himself could not take that away from you. Because it is your nature, you can awaken. Therefore, it is really important in the beginning and in the middle and even right before we walk through the door of liberation itself to go over again and again and again our reasons for practicing, our reasons for entering onto the path. This is not a time where you can simply go off on a tangent or make up your own reasons. You must be firm in your understanding of the faults of cyclic existence. You must be firm in that. And you must be firm in your understanding of what it would take for that situation to be relieved. You can't make up your own heaven. You can't make up a satisfying scenario and think that you can just practice and get it. This isn't mantras for money, you know, or mantras for love. This is looking at the cause of suffering and understanding the antidote. And there are no exceptions. None. No one is exempt from this way. Because no one is free of cause and effect relationships. And no one can be kept away from that goal. So once again, we find out that the ball is in our court. Again and again and again we find this out. That it's for us to do or not do. Why would I choose a subject like this on this anniversary of my enthronement? Well, I'll tell you why. Wouldn't it have been nicer, actually, since this is a special day, if I had talked about something like flowery, maybe talked about something that was really happy, got you all revved up and inspired, and talked about, oh yeah, this is great, Dharma is wonderful, and sort of banged a few drums and sang a few songs and got everybody feeling kind of warm and meaningful. Looked lovingly into your eyes and said, hi, it's been 2 years now, let's get going. Well, I'll tell you why. Because I'll tell you how I see this enthronement. And this is an aside from the teaching. This is just personal, kind of family style, if you don't mind. From my point of view, it's really no big deal. In the sense that it doesn't change at all what I'm doing, what I've chosen to do, and what I will continue to do. It doesn't change my reasons for doing what I do. I've said this again and again and again. I started doing what I'm doing, and I was doing it before any of this ever happened, for one reason, and one reason only, is that I could look around and I could see that all sentient beings were suffering, and it was clear to me that they were suffering because of what was in their minds. And I really didn't wait for someone to enthrone me or put a crown on me or anything like that to get busy, because I felt authorized by that need. And I felt authorized by the fact that it seemed to me that when people began to meditate and act in a virtuous way and examine the roots of their suffering, as I've tried to teach them to do, they made some progress. And seeing that progress, I also felt authorized. So nothing has changed for me, except that I sit in this seat, which is a lot less comfortable than what I used to sit in. That has changed. So that's basically what it means to me, is an uncomfortable seat. And probably more public exposure, which, if any of you know me, that is not what I call a good day. That's not fun for me. However, I also see it this way. And I think that you should see yourself this way as well. I still take it upon myself every day of my life to examine the faults of cyclic existence. I still take it on myself every day of my life to remind myself of why we are doing this, why we are practicing. I don't feel exempt from the need to do that. I continually remind myself that there are no substitute goals and there are no halfway points. There is nothing that I can give you, any of you, on a human level, or that you can give each other, that is going to solve your problem, or is going to remove from you the burden of cause and effect relationships that you have already begun. There is nothing that any of us can give to each other on a human level that will ultimately solve the problems of cyclic existence. And so from that point of view, the only thing that I think really matters, and the only thing that I will really stick with consistently throughout my whole life and never change about, is understanding that I wish to see all sentient beings cross the ocean of suffering and achieve that precious awakened state where there is no more suffering. And I want to do it with them. And that's all that matters to me. Everything else in my life will change, but that will be the one constant. And if it takes sitting on a throne for that to happen, or if it takes, functioning in a certain way, a certain traditional way, for people to have access to a method by which they can do that, then fine, I'm happy to do that. I'm thrilled with it. What I'm really saying is that no personal success, no achievement, no power, no beauty, no wealth, none of that stuff has any real meaning. There's no kind of power that has any real meaning other than the power to alleviate suffering. And that power to alleviate suffering only comes at the time of awakening. So, the only personal achievement or power that I will ever rejoice in for myself or for anyone else will come when I see the fruit of that. I rejoice in those lamas that can facilitate our practice to the degree that we move closer to enlightenment. I celebrate those teachers that can actually teach us the content of our mind to the degree that we can achieve enlightenment. And my belief is that only those themselves who have achieved enlightenment can do that. Therefore, I follow the Buddha's teaching. And I'm a follower, not a leader. I'm in this place because maybe, if cause and effect relationships are really true, at some time I made prayers to be of benefit to others. And that's the only reason why I'm up here. But I am a follower of the Buddha's teaching just like you. And I wish the same thing that you do. That there would be an end to suffering. That all sentient beings could be happy. That they could understand what makes happiness and they could reach for that. And that's the only thing that counts. So when I think about the 2-year anniversary of my enthronement, that's all I think about. Has there been any progress in 2 years? Have any of us changed? Have our minds been purified? Are we kinder? Are we more insightful? Are we any closer to the goal? I hope so. Because otherwise, this is stupid. When you decide to accept the path, I hope you'll think like that. I hope you will decide for yourself that there is meaning in life, but it's not what we thought. This is a precious human rebirth in that we can practice and we can achieve realization. And that's what makes it precious. Not any of the ordinary human temporal goals that we've fooled around with and been disappointed by in the past. Please, in closing, remember what the Buddha has taught. There is an end to suffering. And that end is called enlightenment. So thank you very much for coming here today, for being here today.
To